With all which cases, and hell-devised impositions on consciences in these days, obtruded to debauch and ensnare them, not one of them, levelling at all one design, how smoothly soever conceived, can be taken without a wound and ramp to the conscience. Thirdly, of all these cases, only two are applicable to our imposed transactions with our wicked rulers, that is, in the matter of friendly contracts, or in the matter of judicial appearances before them, and swearing and banding before and to them, in both which there must be a sort of confederation with them. In contracts with them it will not be doubted, and in judicial submitting to their authoritative impositions of such securities it is evident there must be also a confederation with them, not only in acknowledging their authority, but in coming under mutual exacted stipulations, wherein, by taking these oaths and bands, we give them security of orderly subjection, as members of the community whereof they are judges, and get their security of acquittance, and that we shall not get molested or prosecuted among the recusants. Now concerning this confederation, I shall concede in two cases it may be owned, and consequently oaths and bonds may be given to men of their stamp. First, a confederation which is more discretive or discriminative may be allowed to them, that is, such bargains wherein they and we are kept still divided as two parties and not under one corporation, as in contracts of cohabitation, living under them as tenants, buying and selling, and the like. But we cannot enter into a confederation unitive with them, which make us one body or party. And secondly, a confederation which is necessary and unavoidable, when either an unavoidable strife or contention doth arise between them and us, whereupon we are compelled to answer in law, and can no otherwise be decided but by our oath of confirmation, which is an end of all strife, or when we are falsely accused of some odious and heinous crime, as of murder or adultery. It is then lawful and necessary to vindicate ourselves by giving all these legal confirmations that we are free of these things, for otherwise to lie under the imputation of such enormities were shamefully scandalous to religion. But we cannot allow any transaction of this sort, which are elective and voluntary, to make or pursue either peace or please with them, when our own interest or benefit draweth us thereto. But ere we go to law, or give oaths and bonds to and before the unjust and perfidious, and such also as we cannot own as magistrates, we would rather take wrong and suffer ourselves to be defrauded, as the Apostle adviseth, 1 Corinthians 6, verses 1 and 7. It was not lawful, as expositors show from that place, for the Corinthians to answer in law for their own vindication, being pursued by a heathen, but it was utterly a fault to go voluntarily one with another, and if to pursue a brother was a fault, then much more to go to law with an apostate, with whom there should be less meddling. And if to go before the unjust magistrates, as these heathen judges were at Corinth, who yet were magistrates, was utterly a fault, then much more to go before such as have neither rightful nor righteous authority at all, which yet must be acknowledged, if we take oaths and bands before them, for none can exact these but acknowledged magistrates. Hence it is apparent it would be an elective confederation with these wicked usurping judges, when brought before them, to take their tendered oaths and bonds, not as parties pursued before them, but as transacting with them, with whom, as well as before whom, we must give these confirming securities. And so not only must we acknowledge them to be gods among whom the Lord sitteth, whose holy name is interposed in such solemn transactions, but also we must swear and enter in bonds to them as they require. This indeed is necessary when called before them against our will and accused of horrid crimes, as was always in the imposition of the oath of abjuration audaciously imputed to the refusers, that they asserted murdering principles, and owned it lawful to kill all that served the king, in such a case to declare with the most solemn asseverations for vindication of truth, that we disown not only all such assertions, but all such thoughts, as that it is lawful to kill all that serve the king, or any that serve him because they serve him, or because they have injured us in any manner of way, and to declare our abhorrence of all murder and assassinations. But to swear such things to them, when we are altogether innocent, would be a granting that we were legally suspected, by offering a legal purgation. And so all the subjects of Scotland should take upon them to purge themselves from a suspicion of murder which were odious, and to abjure a declaration, as asserting such things when it asserts no such thing is a swearing to a lie. Number 4. All solemn securities of oaths or bonds that are sacred promises are by strictness of law of most strict and indispensable obligation, as Mr. Durham on the third command shows in many cases. No man's loss or private prejudice can make it void. Though we swear it to our own hurt, we must not change. Psalm 15, verse 4. No indifferency in the matter, if once engaged in, for then our souls are bound. Numbers 30, verse 2. Nor deceit of others, if the deceit be circumstantial only, as in the Gibeonites' case. Nor the extortion of it by fear or violence, if the matter be lawful, nor rashness and sin in the matter, if lawful in the matter, as with the Gibeonites, nor another meaning afterwards devised, not according to the imposer's mind, nor our own at first who took it, that is, but a swearing deceitfully, Psalm 24, verse 4, nor any good meaning or design in reserving the oath. Saul was punished for breaking his oath with the Gibeonites, out of zeal, 2 Samuel 21, verse 2. Not though the oath be conceived by creatures, as by the altar or temple, etc., Matthew 33, verses 20 through 22, nor when the thing becomes impossible, if that possibility could have been foreseen or prevented, nor any other sacred meaning, by equivocation or mental reservation, which are abominable, nor any dispensation from pope or king, nor any other posterior oath. None of these things can make an oath void, but if we have bound ourselves, God will require it. Quote, For whoso despiseth an oath by breaking the covenant, when lo he hath given his hand, he shall not escape. God shall recompense it. Unquote. Ezekiel 17, verses 18 and 19. They are null indeed, and of no force, when they become bonds of iniquity, tying to things unlawful or impossible, or when the thing sworn is not in our own power, Numbers 30, verse 5, or when there is deceit in it, not in circumstantials only, but in essentials, or when it hinders a greater good, when the case materially altereth, or when the party sworn to relaxeth us. All these do condemn the horrid breach of the sacred and solemn league and covenant, and confutes the perverting and wresting the words of in the third article, as if it did oblige to allegiance of tyrants. For, in that case, the obligation is unlawful, and there is a case in essentials, and the case materially altereth. For in the covenant we are bound to a king, not to a tyrant, and the parties sworn to have relaxed us long ago by annulling the covenant. Yet all these things prove that the covenant is still in force, and that all the oaths and bonds contradictory to it are sinful. And yet, though it be sinful to take them, and sinful to keep them, it is nevertheless perjury to break them, especially to them whose erroneous conscience is bound by them, under a notion of their lawfulness. And in a special manner it is here conspicuous how deceitful a judge that sinful shift of many hath been, that they could subscribe an unlawful bond under a penalty, as for example to answer to their courts, or to go to church, or separate from the persecuted meetings of the Lord's people, under such a penalty, which they thought to pay the penalty would clear them off, as if it were only an alternative bond. The iniquity of this juggle will appear, if we consider such bonds cannot be alternative, for alternatives are always disjunctive, binding equally either to this or that, and the one alternative is no more determinately enjoined by the imposer than the other. And so, if these bonds were alternative, it should be in the binder's choice, whether to answer the court, go to church, to separate meetings, or to pay so much money. But it is not so, for the stipulation and promise is determinate to the obligation for which the bond is required, and the penalty is annexed, as a punishment of the breach of that obligation. And that fancy of eluding the bond by paying the penalty would quite enervate all security among men in their mutual compacts of that nature, and under that pretense they might give a satisfactory compliance to the most wicked imposed obligation imaginable, to subscribe the Turk's Alcoran with a reserved attention only to pay the imposed penalty, which reservation is so far from being suitable to that Christian simplicity the gospel requires, that it does not answer that moral honesty that our concern in the good of human society calls for. It is incumbent on all that expect to dwell on God's holy hill to have this requisite qualification for one. Though they swear to their own hurt, they will not change it, and they must be far from swearing deceitfully, and consequently if they bind themselves by a promise, which a Christian should be no less tender of than his oath, they must keep it. And besides, to condescend that penalty or fine should be paid by ourselves or friends in our behalf, were to condescend that these enemies should be enriched by our own or the spoil of our friends, upon the account of the forfeiture of our promise, which seems such a dishonest and dishonorable thing that an honest heart would disdain it. And though this should be flouted as foolish preciousness to choose rather to lie still and suffer in such a case, yet it may be considered that Christ's cross, even with reproaches, is always a better choice than the world's ease, purchased at any price, which is a hire for Christ's enemies. Fifthly, all divines and causes do grant that an oath must be taken in his sense and meaning who tenders it, and in whose favor it is conceived, because oaths and bonds are for security, and therefore whosoever would deal honestly and Christianly in taking an oath must take it in the sense that it is understood by such as impose it. Otherwise the holy name of God should be taken in vain, and the swearers and promisers shall deal deceitfully, in frustrating the end of the oath or bond, and the design of the tenderness thereof. And therefore, as reason and religion requires, that all oaths or bonds be so conceived and enunciated, that all concerned may understand them, and, if there be any doubt how far they bind, the imposers should explain the same, as Abraham did to his servant. So conscience requires that they may be always taken in the imposer's sense, and that they discover their sense and sentiments of them, and not according to the meaning that we may think the words capable of, nor yet according to the wheedling explications that they may give or allow, which are as deceitful and ensnaring as the things themselves. Nor is it to be looked upon as a favor to get a liberty to put a sense upon them, contrary to their known meaning, for that is but a liberty to mock God, to mock others and ourselves too, and nothing but a snare to the conscience. And to put a gloss upon printed oaths or bonds, which in strict construction they will not bear, and then to subscribe them in the terms as offered, is not only an entangling ourselves into the bond of sinful oaths and bands, but to stumble the godly, and harden the wicked in the present, and to mock posterity in future ages, who shall see the oaths of the terms subscribed, but not the sense they were taken in. See Apologetic Relations, section 14. It is known by manifold experiences that it is dangerous to hearken to their overtures who study to ensnare us, but far more hurtful and hateful to propound overtures to them. For they interpret it as a ceding and giving ground, and when they see a man beginning to yield, then they will seem to be very condescending, even to accept of little at first, that they may draw him on to more. The cunning angler sometimes recoiling and drawing back the well-baited and busked hook to invite the poor unwary fish to pursue, and sometimes letting it run away with the hook when it bites kindly. So when they find a man offering and ready to accept of accommodations, they will be very yielding and easy, but with the design to hook him. But conscience can find no safety at present, nor satisfaction afterwards in accommodations with them. For it is plain to all that are not blinded with ignorance or partiality or a judicial stroke, that our imposers are such sons of Belial as cannot be taken with hands or by the hand, and if we reflect upon the matters upon which these accommodations are to be offered or accepted, they are not things upon which we may come and go upon our discretion, as we do with our own particulars, or with problems to be disputed, or ambiguous propositions, capable of different senses, but matters so and so circumstantiate, as do require the positive determinate judgment of the conscience, concerns of truth and falsehood, duty and sin, which cannot admit of accommodation, or dispensation, or reservation, or any other sense than the imposers and they that state their inquisition upon such things do own, and are observedly known to have and maintain about them. Otherwise, all other forged accommodations are but tampering tricks, juggling with jugglers, deceiving the deceivers, in such a way as does not well consist with the simplicity of the gospel, or the dove's innocency. For what is that but a swearing or promising deceitfully? Psalm 24, verse 4, quote, a conceiving and uttering from the heart words of falsehood, unquote. Isaiah 59, verse 13, quote, a false oath, unquote. Zechariah 8, verse 17, quote, which are hateful to God, who will be a swift witness against false swearers, unquote. Malachi 3, verse 5, Neither will they be so easily deceived, for they will readily yield to accommodations, or any tolerable sense that we can put upon their snares, so they reckon that a yielding in part, and are glad to find us so far justifying their acts and impositions, as by our offer practically to declare they bear a good sense, and they will come many ways to our hand to get us hooked so.